Brent Stafford, and welcome to another edition of RegWatch on GFN.TV. We're here in Warsaw, Poland for the Global Forum on Nicotine, GFN 22, and joining us in person is Dr. Brad Rodu. Brad, thanks for coming back on the show.
It's great to be back with you.
So tell us, for viewers who don't know where you're from and what you do, fill us in.
Well, I'm a professor of medicine at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. I also hold an endowed chair in tobacco harm reduction research at the Cancer Center there. I've been conducting tobacco research and advocating for safer cigarette substitutes since 1994. That's 28 years.
How much of that time have you been on the outside?
Oh, for quite a bit of it. It's been a struggle to get this information across to smokers so that they can make choices that will impact their lives and their health.
So what was it then, I guess, was it from your medical experience that you witnessed some of the, ravaging that smoking does on the body?
That's right. I'm an oral pathologist, and I worked in a cancer center treating and making diagnoses under the microscope and clinically of many, many kinds of cancers and immunosuppressed cancer patients undergoing therapy. I saw lots of cancers and many of them in smokers, and at that point the 2-minute warning is over and folks are looking at death. And so that's what drove me to find a way to help smokers quit that didn't involve completely abstaining from all nicotine and tobacco products.
Now, does quitting smoking actually, prevent the cancer, or is it too late at some point?
Well, obviously, the more you smoke, the higher the risk, and the more chance that you're going to have a deadly disease. But to be honest with you, you can quit almost any time before you're 40 years of age and avoid almost all of the risks. That's not widely known, but that's what the data, that's what the statistics say. And so the sooner you quit, the better. But quitting at almost any age, and we've demonstrated this in research reports, quitting at almost any age does improve your chances as opposed to continuing to smoke at that age.
So say you're a 30, 35-year-old male, you've been smoking for 15, 20 years, you quit through nicotine vaping. Mm-hmm. Would you enjoy the same benefits as if you had just quit smoking altogether?
Well, of course we don't have long-term epidemiologic studies of vaping, but from everything we know about the chemistry, about what's in the vape, we're pretty sure that the benefits are going to be lifelong and long-term with respect to the risk of picking up a smoking-related disease. We know that from studies of Swedish snus and American smokeless tobacco products that contain lots of nicotine but no smoke. We know that's a benefit to people who switch.
So we're here at the Global Forum on Nicotine, and of course this is its 9th year, I believe, or the 9th edition. So that's a lot of time spent on a conference and efforts focused around nicotine. Why such the effort around nicotine? Do people not understand nicotine and what it is?
Well, before I get to that question, 9 years, especially for American audiences, that's 3.6 million dead smokers. That's why we're here, and that's occurring all over the world, and that's why we need a worldwide effort to move smokers that can't quit or won't quit to safer products.
So what is it about this issue then that has so many people up in arms? It certainly appears the FDA doesn't share that view, and WHO doesn't share that view.
Well, and as you said about nicotine, that's one of the problems. The overwhelming opinion by smokers and non-smokers, and including a lot of health professionals, is that nicotine is not only addictive, which it is, nicotine is the cause of many of the illnesses that smokers have high risks for. That is what's false. And that is what's frustrating, that FDA, which is the regulator of nicotine and tobacco, hasn't tried to correct that misinformation, especially with American smokers.
So is nicotine safe?
I think nicotine is about as safe as another widely consumed addictive drug called caffeine. It's available in coffee. There are lots of people addicted to it, but long-term consumption of caffeine results in virtually no serious health effects. That's what we know about nicotine. It's not the same drug. It doesn't affect the brain in the same way, but we think that the lack of serious health effects is almost equivalent to those of caffeine. And I've been saying this with no one pushing back since 1994.
So if you're an adult of majority age and you are not a smoker, and you for some reason decided that you wanted to pick up a mild nicotine habit, is there anything wrong with that?
I don't see any major problem with people who find benefit from using nicotine in a smoke-free distribution system. I don't see a major impact with that. Not with all the other health concerns that health professionals worry about with respect to our patients.
You know, we hear all the time, and it's growing actually, the voices on this, is that nicotine harms developing brains.
Yes, we hear that. And my response has been that there's actually, outside of some animal models where they overload developing mice with big doses of nicotine, outside of that, there is virtually no human evidence that nicotine has affected brain development. And let me give you an example. We have 30 million adult smokers in the United States. We have somewhere about double that, 60, 70 million former smokers. It has never been shown anything clinically that those current or former smokers are different in any way from their non-smoking, lifelong non-smoking counterparts. There's no evidence for it at all. So how can they say the nicotine's affected their brain development? We have lots of ways to scan brains now, but no one's ever demonstrated any defect.
So how then can CDC, which does make this claim, and it's made by many government organizations that are involved in tobacco control, that nicotine harms developing brains? I mean, there's research I've just even seen recently in the last month coming out trying to establish some kind of cause and effect on this, when common sense shows that it can't be the case.
Well, I mentioned mouse models. There are also they also try to produce these effects in cells that are grown in laboratory conditions. And I can tell you, I've participated in some molecular biology research. You can take cells growing in a plate, you can torture them and make them do just about anything you want them to do. You can get anything, any impact you want. But when you do that in normal doses to the human, the entire human, you don't get those same cellular effects. And so I think all of that research is blown out of proportion for two reasons. Number one is to establish that nicotine is a demon drug. And number two, it's to get more and more funding. You have to make your research as relevant as you can so that you can get funded for the next grant and keep rolling in that funding stream. There's no credible evidence that nicotine causes cancer. Again, a lot of those studies are taking nicotine and isolating it in cells and trying to produce effects at the gene level or other effects that then they claim is relevant to the cancer development in humans. Take Swedish men. They're probably the highest prevalence of smokeless tobacco use, what we call snus, in the entire developed world. And they've been able to find virtually no impact on cancer incidence or cancer mortality among those men who use snus for a lifetime. So impacts in cells don't translate into impacts in humans, and that's what I believe we should be focused on.
Let's take a moment to discuss this conference, GFN. Why is it important to have an event like this?
Well, GFN is exciting because it's not just academics or professionals in tobacco control talking to each other. It's a lot of folks interested in tobacco harm reduction or safer substitutes, but they come from all directions. There are professionals here, but there are also consumers. Consumers need to play a role. The usual statement, nothing for us or about us.
Right.
That's very important. And I'm always excited to appear and to discuss these issues with the consumers that are being affected. Because that's, again, how I was brought into the issue. I was dealing with the patients, but it's too late. These consumers have used these products just in time.
Now, you were recognized last night with Dr. Mike Russell Award for your work in tobacco control. What did that mean to win that award?
Well, it was overwhelming. I've spent 28 years in this field, and as I indicated earlier, I came into the field as a pathologist who had had experience with the end results of a smoking career. In comparison to a lot of folks in tobacco control who are specialists with addiction medicine, psychiatry, psychology, public health, they have a different focus. It's a great focus, but they haven't seen as much of the end results as I have. So I always considered myself a little bit separate and never part of the usual groups of folks who tried to promote tobacco harm reduction. But this award last night, based on the grandfather of this concept, the visionary who saw this years before anyone else. He's a visionary that when I first published my first paper, and I was tobacco naive publishing this paper, I referenced in my articles because I knew who had the best research, and he did. And so I worshiped him like everybody else here did, and to have an award with my name in any way in the same universe as Michael Russell's name is just unbelievable.
One of the things the attendees here at GFN are struggling with is how to figure out a way to somehow bridge the divide within public health on this issue. Is there a divide, and what to do about it?
There is a divide, but the divide is still very lopsided. I mean, when I came into the field, I couldn't find collaborators or others that had the same interests in safer products. Now there is a small contingent of folks in many countries who are definitely interested in helping smokers switch. That's why this event is so important, because it brings together people and allows us to share ideas and plot where to go next. But it's still a very lopsided. When you say public health, I would have to say that the dominant numbers in public health are still very much against this. And that means all of the major medical societies, all in the US and Canada, all of the major governmental agencies. It's still a very, very lopsided affair. I think one of the major goals in the United States, and adopted it seems more and more in Canada, is this idea of a tobacco-free society. And the way the government funds that vision is it uses a fairly substantial budget at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to fund academic researchers throughout the country. And mainly their goal is to find bad effects of any form of tobacco use. And right now the emphasis is on e-cigarettes and vaping. Now that's being supplemented by a transfer of somewhere around $200 to $300 million in tobacco user fees from FDA over to NIH to feed that pipeline. Now, when those researchers are funded for those effects, and it doesn't matter whether they had an original interest in tobacco or not, they take their research program and they adapt it to the tobacco resources and they get grants. And then the most prominent effect of those grants, the most prominent results are negatives against any tobacco use. And so that tends to promote more and more outrageous findings. Number one, to reach the media, and number two, to reach your next grant. And those outrageous findings even at times border on the fraudulent. And that's an area that we've had some activity with.
What do you mean fraudulent?
Well, I mean false results. Results that are simply not true.
From government-funded research?
Absolutely. And it's pervasive. And so if a person like me at a university wants to get other colleagues to participate in tobacco harm reduction research project of some sort, other investigators, most of whom are NIH funded, never want to risk alienating the funding agency, no matter what their research is, because they know what the NIH intentions are for tobacco. So it's a big problem, and it affects nearly all university research.
So is that then an inherent bias? The government seeks to pay for research that will support a preconceived position on this issue?
I think largely that's the case. Government funding supports negatives for tobacco research and has never been interested in a balanced approach toward these harm reduction products. Let me give you an example. In 1994, I published my first article basically suggesting that smokeless tobacco was less dangerous, less hazardous than cigarettes, and should be considered by smokers who are unable to quit. The National Cancer Institute, which is the largest of the NIH agencies, communicated to my university that this idea was unethical, that no one should be talking about this. And they indicated that I was unethical to be on the faculty. They challenged my faculty position in my university and challenged the university that this idea was not to be tolerated. And I don't think that mindset has changed in any way in the last 28 years. It drives everything at universities. And so it makes it very difficult for anybody who is balking at the main theme to get anywhere.
What is your advice, I think, for people attending this conference and those watching it online in terms of how to move forward to secure these kind of rights for consumers to have access to these tobacco harm reduction products?
Well, one thing we have to be vigilant is when a study's published, don't just read the headline. Because the headline is generated by the researcher who's NIH funded, is transferred to the university. Their media relations department always wants to get maximum exposure. And then the anti-tobacco crusaders always want to use that to drive down tobacco products. Don't pay attention to the headlines. The second thing that I'm trying to share with participants here is that we need some sort of post-publication review that's systematic. And I'm not just talking about reading the paper and trying to find minor issues. I'm talking about taking their data, the data they used, and conducting a new analysis that checks it. Because when we did that with several studies now, we've come up with major problems. And we've had published letters to editors at journals, and the journal editors are very reluctant to change their decisions based on a challenge after publication. But we have a couple in process right now. As you know, we took care of an especially egregious study claiming that vaping causes heart attacks, which was completely invalid, completely fraudulent, because those heart attacks had occurred 10 years before those participants picked up an e-cigarette. So that's the kind of review, that's the kind of work that has to be done to keep this anti-vaping crusade in check.